is personal when Inuit women have to think twice about nursing their babies. It's very personal that my grandson would lose what I had as the foundation upon which I can have the courage and the commitment and the focus to do what I do.
In Iqaluit, Nunavut, summer is but a passing thought. But to Sheila Watt-Cloutier, her home is the front line in the fight to prevent the effects of global warming. Nominated for a Nobel Prize, she lost to Al Gore, who never bothered to acknowledge her message of congratulations. But to Watt-Cloutier, it's not about prizes, it's about survival. We met in Iqaluit.
You spent the first part of your life living a traditional lifestyle, did you not?
That's right, the way of life,
like?
Yes. We traveled only by dog team all winter long and canoe in the summertime. So yes, we were out a lot hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
The family, especially my brothers, my older brothers were the hunters in the house. And that's what we did. So ice and snow and the cold was a way of life for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did that in some way, was that sort of formative for you in what you've, I guess it had to be, in what you ended up becoming, though you're doing things now that I'm sure back then you never would have realized you were doing, but it must have been part of it.
That's right. Well, the connection comes very early. The connection to what the land and the ice gives you in terms of the bounty that it offers. And that's our country food that we're so connected to, which is because we're a hunting culture. And so it always was about that, you know, in the pursuit of wonderful animals that fed us, nourished us, but also what the land and the hunting culture offers and gives in terms of the sense of identity, the sense of peace, you know, that it gives you when you're out there, and the sense of family and community that always was there for us.
Do you think there's an underappreciation of all of those things by people in the South?
Oh, absolutely. Not only underappreciation, but a real lack of understanding, a real lack of comprehension as to what the power of the hunting culture is, not just in terms of the pursuit of the animal or the harvesting of the animal, but the actual brilliance and ingenuity and wisdom of a hunting culture is very misunderstood.
Yeah. Have there been any, I mean, people like yourself are out there trying to change that. Have there been inroads, do you think?
I think so, and more, and every day. When I travel, especially now in our own country in the last 2 years, because most of my work was international before that, I find that with every audience, I see lights going on for the first time that they fully understand, or at least starting to understand what this is all about, that it isn't just about ice, it isn't just about polar bears, but it's really about the people who have lived here for millennia and who really have a lot to offer in terms of understanding what balanced sustainability is. And so, yes, indeed, one audience at a time, I think, and I think it's working.
Now, I don't want this to sound like I'm underappreciative of all this, but being a Southern boy, I'm freezing to death standing here, so can we go somewhere warm and finish this conversation?
I'm actually freezing myself.
Okay,
this is my first day.
All right,
it's real cold,
let's
so let's
get
go.
inside. All right.
Okay.
Sheila, you said to me, people know your glory, but they don't know your story. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your story. When you mentioned that you spent the first part of your life living in a sort of traditional way, but then you went off, right? You went south and you went to school. Where did you go first?
I was sent to Nova Scotia for 2 years when I was 10 years old. It was a nursing couple that had been working up in the Arctic, or in Nunavik, in Kuujjuaq, where I was born. And my mother had worked for them, and somehow, I'm not quite sure how it all happened with the government, but myself and another 10-year-old girl, my friend Lizzie, were sent off for school. Nova Scotia first, 2 years.
What was it like for you? Were you frightened at the time? A 10-year-old, that's kind of scary.
It is. It was. And, you know, as well-intended as people were, and as good as they were in many ways, it was very traumatic for 10-year-olds to be sent off at that age without their parents. It would be somewhat like sending your 10-year-old maybe to China for, you know, for a whole school year. And
I mean, it would be an alien landscape to you, wouldn't it? In all senses of the word.
Very much so. You know, the food, the language. We lost our language the first couple of years for sure, and it took us a long time to gain it back. But because when you're young, you learn fast, but if you're not in the milieu of your language, you lose it very fast.
So you were just going to school and you were living with this couple? Was that how it worked?
That's right, with this family. and we lived there, went to school, and we would come home only in the summertime. And that was 2 years in Nova Scotia. And then another 3 years in Churchill, Manitoba, which was I hesitate to say residential school because it wasn't really. It was more of although it was a residential setting, it's not that same definition as residential schools.
Okay.
It was run by the federal government in Ottawa, the vocational sector, I think it was, in Ottawa. And it was run by federal folks. Mm-hmm. And there were 200 of us, Inuit from Nunavut, Nunavik, that would be sent off to Churchill, Manitoba in a residential setting. It
right.
was what we called it a hostel, a Churchill Vocational Center. And 3 years there.
So that would be like, say, 13 to 16?
12 to 15.
12 to 15,
yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, 15 to 17 in Ottawa to finish up my high school.
So, and where in Ottawa? Were you just going to a regular high school then?
Regular
or?
high school.
Okay.
Mm-hmm, at the time.
So and you would go home, you'd come back up north then only in the summertime during that?
Well, the first 5 years.
Yeah.
When I left home, we were still on the dog teams. We were traveling by dog team.
Yeah.
Because the first 10 years of my life, that's the only mode of transportation that we had was dog team. And when I was leaving, we were still on dog team, traveling by dog team. And I never came home for Christmas for 5 years. And only because I think the government just didn't send us home at Christmas time. And finally, after 5 years, my mother asked the government if she paid half the ticket, would they be able to pitch in and pay the other half? And the answer was yes. So after 5 years, we were able to see Christmas at home and see winter at home. And there was a huge transition that had happened in those 5
Yes.
years from dog team to snowmobiles. So it was a real shocker. They're a real shocker.
So it's a shock. I mean, for a kid that age, that's a shock on either end of it, right? You're sent away from what you know,
Right.
into an unusual
From family,
situation.
from culture, from language.
And then when you finally get to
Yeah.
come back, everything that you knew from before isn't that way anymore.
No, many things had changed. Many things. In
What
fact,
did that do to you, do you think?
well, you're 15 and you're coming home and you're already in the swing of teenage years. And so we very quickly were getting into, bell bottoms and almost we were a little bit younger than the real hippie days,
Yeah.
and then we, in fact, didn't make it to Woodstock because we were a little bit too young for that, about 3 years, I think. But we were very, we adjusted and adapted very quickly into the new modern world of miniskirts and go-go boots and bell-bottoms and so on. And that's what we did. We were that part of that, the music, the Beatles, all of that was coming in. And we were very, very attached to all of that very quickly. But so coming home, yes, it was a shocker more in the winter. I remember it being much more of a shock coming home for Christmas after 5 years. And hearing and experiencing these very loud machines on the roads. In fact, it scared me, and I remember having to ask my mom, could you walk me to the teen dance or to the movie house or wherever, because I was just quite afraid of these machines that I had not ever seen before. Yeah. Dogs were tied up, and they were not an intrusion, to a community's way of life, whereas these snowmobiles that were coming in were.
What about your political awakenings? When did they start?
They started very late because I know that a lot of, even my family members, my brother is a politician since he was very young, and he is a Liberal senator. And many of my brother's age group started politics very, very young. And they got into all of the land claims negotiations and so on. And I just stayed right out of that. I thought I was raising 2 young children at the time to begin with. But I went into another branch of work, education. Mm-hmm. I worked with young people, and I did that for a long period of time. And I swore I would never go into politics. It just was not something that captured me. It was not something that I felt was interesting for me, or that it was even any form of calling for me in my life. And so I stayed away from it quite a bit. And it was only in 1993, after I had been working on education issues, social issues, for a long period of time, then I was involved in a review of our education system.
This is in northern Quebec,
Northern
right?
Quebec,
Yeah.
in Nunavik, yes. And I thought, perhaps I could give myself a little bit of a political power base now to try to address some of the issues that I felt were important, like education, youth issues, the addictions, the social problems, and so on, the health issues. And so I ran in 1993 at the for Makivik Corporation as corporate secretary. That was a position, elected position in our region. The first time I didn't get in. And I just continued plugging away. And in 95 I re-ran. Or 92 was when I first ran. 3 years later I ran again and I got in. And that was a regional position, elected position. And the same year, this was in March, the same year off I went as a Nunavik delegate to the Inuit Circumpolar Council. It used to be called the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, and it's now Council. Off to, as a delegate from Nunavik, on this, what we call the General Assembly of ICC, Inuit Circumpolar Council, that would meet every 3 years. Now it's every 4 years, but every 3 years, where all the leaders of the 4 countries where we Inuit live, in Canada, in Greenland, in Alaska, USA, and in Russia. And we're about close to 160,000 Inuit in the world, in those 4 countries. So at the time I was representing Nunavik, and I was selected as one of the leaders to go. And I went as a delegate. And there we were, you know, meeting for the full 5 days. And I was rather verbal on many things. And when it came to elect, because we have those elections, we have alternating chairmanship. We also have the election of each country has a national office of ICC. And people started to say, we're going to nominate you so you can head the Canadian branch. I said, no, I'm pretty green in politics. I just got into the regional politics, and I don't think I want to get too involved in anything else. No, no, no. The busiest people are usually the ones that get things done. We're going to ask you, and we want you to we want to nominate you. So they did, and I came home and I said, what happened? You know, I didn't see that coming. I had no intentions of taking on any other political mandate or role other than the one that I had just been elected to in my region.
Just talk to me personally about how you felt during all of this, because I remember the Globe and Mail in a profile of you once wrote that you were an introvert doing an extrovert's work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you think that's true?
It is true. It doesn't come naturally, and well, you know, it takes a lot of practice to be public to begin with. I think for anybody, unless you're just really an extrovert and just thrive on it. I don't. I actually have to work at it to be so public, and it always has been that way. I remember in high school almost dying when we had to do, you know, what do you call it? Public speaking. Public speaking stuff.
So you blocked it out of your mind.
Oh my gosh, you know, it was really just difficult for me, very difficult. And so I was not one. And I think maybe that's why I shied away from politics for a long period of time to begin with, because I just preferred working, you know, in smaller groups and not be so public.
How did you adapt to it?
Again, it's still work to this day. It becomes easier with practice, and you don't become as frightened by the experience, and it takes less time to recoup and you know, just settle things down. But certainly for many years, you know, being out there in such a public light would take its toll. I would have to come home and and this place, you know, I've been here for almost 10 years now doing such public work that I come home and I cocoon. I still do that.
It's like a sanctuary to you, right?
It's a real sanctuary to me. This is my haven that I come home to, and there's quiet, there's peace, and the view here is just majestic, and it all just kind of rejuvenates me and nurtures me back to health and to life, really.
I have to ask you about the Nobel nomination, because that one got a lot of attention. In fact, I read somewhere, and now this may not be true too, but so I'll ask you to confirm these things. But I had read in one of the pieces at the time that things then got so hectic for you once the nomination was made public, which is very rare that a nomination is made public, that you had to hire an agent to handle all the requests that you were getting. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't that I was seeking an agent. The agencies were seeking me when that happened, when things were starting to escalate and I was becoming much more of a public figure. Because don't forget, I did a lot of the work globally for many, many years, so Canada really didn't know who I was.
Yes.
And then when the nomination came, Canadians said, a fellow Canadian, being not, who is she? And that's when it all just, really just went out there. And I'm now more and more known in Canada, but I was much better known internationally until the Nobel nomination.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that, because as I just said, it's not, usually those nominations are not made public.
No, they're
not. This is because somebody on the committee actually said it.
No,
right?
actually, the nominators, the two members of Parliament of Norway, who actually are from different parties, but they thought this was such an important issue globally. It was the issue of our time. It needed to be very public. They came together jointly nominating both Al Gore and myself. And they did it very strategically, I think, to get the world to understand that this was a huge issue that really needed to be addressed, and so it became very, very public.
Yeah. Where were you when you found out?
I was home. I got up and, as usual, took my time, my little office here in my house, and I received a call from CBC radio here, and saying, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "No, what news was this?" And she said, "You and Al Gore have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize." I said,
"Oh, said, who is this?"
I said, "Oh, that's interesting." But that was very
that's
public.
Interesting?
No, because I'll tell you something which most people don't know about. I was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize the year before, and it was not public.
Oh,
it was not public because they never really are.
Right.
So I remember the academics who knew this was happening said, the story has become, the nomination, but really the story is not necessarily the nomination. It's the members of Parliament who nominated, Al Gore and Sheila, and that has become the story, because little do they know that Sheila Watt-Cloutier was nominated the year before as well, you see? So this is one of the rare times I've ever said this publicly, and certainly on camera. This might be the first time. But, so, I was picking up a little bit on some of these things, that were happening. But still, this was not even on my mind when this, because I don't know the timelines of nominations and all of this that goes on with the Nobel, certainly. So it was not on my mind when the phone rang and said that we had been jointly nominated.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about the direction that you have taken this whole issue in the last little while is tying in the issue of environmental degradation to human rights.
Right.
And I think that if there is probably going to be any progress made anywhere, given what we're seeing transpire now when it comes to nations trying to come up with ways to deal with environmental degradation, and they can't seem to agree on anything. That this, in fact, may be one avenue where there can be some progress. Now, you had done a lot of work on persistent organic pollutants and had some success there with PCBs and PVCs and so on. But you also you went before, what is it, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, right? Commission
on Human Rights.
And you put a petition together.
Yes.
Tell me what the idea behind that was.
Well, the petition was not just a petition where you have signatures of names. This was a full-fledged 167-page legal document that took us 2 years with legal teams from America and my own legal counsel that was living here in Iqaluit. What happened is, for us, we're so few in the world, 155,000, 160,000 Inuit in the world. And to have what was happening to us, especially, the POPs, the persistent organic pollutants, the toxins in our food chain, in our blood, in the nursing milk of our mothers, were in the 80s. Inuit women had to think twice before they breastfed their babies. What a world we have created, and I've said this often, what a world we have created that Inuit women would have to think twice about nursing their babies as a result of toxins, not of our doing, coming from afar. So we were being poisoned from afar in those years, and we still are not complacent about it being okay, because there's always new toxins that come into play. And so for us, it's not just an environmental issue. This is first and foremost a health issue for us, and a very serious one. And again, I got an email today on, again, toxin issues being up in, playing themselves out to be once again an issue for us. And so you can't be complacent, as I said earlier, on these issues. They're very, very real, very serious. And we knew how tough it was to get the world and to put the human face on the map and to get the world to come together to do the right thing, which then led to the signing of the Stockholm Convention, which is a very successful convention. But again, we need to ensure that it's being implemented effectively so that we can continue to hunt and eat what we harvest safely. We knew how tough that was, that work, but we're glad we had it under our belt when we realized that the issue of dealing with climate change globally was going to be even more of a monumental challenge. And so we started to talk a long time ago. I remember some of my board members even, because, you know, I was elected and we had board members from the regions here and from the 4 countries. And I remember a board member saying, what recourse do we have as Inuit when we become poisoned from afar? And now our climate and environment is changing so rapidly that we again will be disproportionately negatively impacted by this. What recourse? Do we have legal recourse? What do we do? Well, you know, you put on your thinking hats and you start to think about some of these connections that can be made. And you know, in life, I'm always impressed by serendipity or synchronicity, in where when you start to, you know, frame your mind about doing some things and your intention starts to grow, that there are other people in the world that are doing the same. So it happens that as we were thinking about what recourses do we have, there were other environmental law firms in the United States that were thinking along the lines and had already started to legally make those kinds of connections. So one of my advisors said, we've come across some folks who are moving in that direction and they'd love to meet you. And I said, timely, very timely. So off we went to Washington, D.C., and I remember sitting in the lobby of a hotel with one of the lawyers starting to flush this out. What will this look like? How do we do this? What is a petition versus a lawsuit? All of these things that one has to really start to sort through. And so that was the beginning of that. And then it was to try to have a buy-in with our fellow leaders and fellow Inuit on this is the direction that we need to take, because really when you think about it and when you look through even the legal declarations that are out there that are there to protect the citizens of the world, and we based ourselves on the 1948 Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, our right to health, our right to culture, our right to our use of our lands, our hunting, all of these things, health, which are already entrenched in that declaration, we knew were already being minimized or destroyed by climatic changes. We are, after all, a people who depend upon the ice, the snow, and the cold to not only survive up here in the Arctic, but thrive and continue to maintain our hunting culture. It's based on, that's the very foundation of a hunting culture of Inuit of the Arctic. And so the linkages were easy to make. And so for 2 years, the legal teams, you know, we gathered testimony from 62 Inuit, hunters, elders, women from Canada and Alaska. And we were able to gather those testimonies and weave them into this legal document. And then after 2 years of preparation, we launched the petition to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
In our last couple of minutes, I'm going to give you a quote. This is a quote from you, and then ask you to sort of elaborate on this and talk about a couple of other things. You said once, tumultuous change, together with historical traumas, have created an incredible breakdown of our society in the Arctic. Absolutely. And you've also said in other things, I think of all those young people at home, that's here in the North, who are grappling with issues, and who all too often we lose so young. There are, I guess what I want to ask you about is your optimism, if you still have some, in the face of not only these environmental issues, which then become health issues, but also there are other scourges now in the North that we know of, alcohol and drugs being two of them. And these days, from my experiences here in Iqaluit, talking to people, drugs being a big one. Are you optimistic that the culture that you're fighting so hard to preserve can be preserved in the face of all of that? Absolutely. Now, I have been asked this question before in terms of, why do you focus so much on environmental issues when we have so many social problems? And my response always has been, there is no disconnect between the two. Because
the harvesting of animals is one component or one aspect of our hunting culture. The other aspect, which most people have not come to understand, is the power of the process of the hunt itself, and that the land and the way our culture is really our training ground for young people. It isn't just the technical aspect of aiming the gun, skinning the seal, cutting the meat, and so on, although that's very important. It is the actual training of the character skills of young people that a hunting culture offers in a very natural nature setting that is very powerful. It teaches you automatically, as you're waiting for the snow to fall, the ice to form, the winds to die down, the animals to surface, patience immediately. You learn to be very patient. You learn also to be bold under pressure, to withstand stress, to be very reflective, to be extremely focused. Very important, because your family is expecting you to come home with something, but you're also expecting to become an independent thinker that will ultimately have sound judgment and wisdom on the land, as well as transferring those skills into the modern world. And in fact, those skills that are so transferable that I'm talking about, the character skills, are a requirement for a people like us who are transitioning so quickly. And that's one of the reasons, I believe, and I've worked on many education issues that have looked deeply at some of these issues, is that we have disconnected too much, and that not enough of our young people are out on the land learning all of this. And the new institutional way of learning has severed and separated the academic or the technical with the character building of children, and how to prepare them for the challenges and opportunities of life. That's one of the issues. So when I talk about protection of environment, it's really about what we're losing in terms of teaching and training our children to survive the odds on the land, as well as this transitioning world that has come to be. So there is no separation in my mind, in my experience, on protecting environment and climate to protecting and lowering suicide rates in the Arctic with our young people. Really, there isn't. And in fact, the young people who remain very connected to our cultural way of life and who remain hunting with their families and learning and becoming and really learning about themselves and strengthening their sense of identity and their sense of self-worth as providers and becoming natural conservationists are the ones who are making it. So one way of life does not have to be at a cost to the other. It isn't about, putting ourselves, becoming just hunters for the rest of our lives. It's about bringing what we learn as hunters to the new world and balancing the two. So that's what this fight, though, if you want to call it a fight, I don't really call it a fight. I call it I don't know what I call it, my passion or something that I feel very compelled to be doing is really personal, Like when I launched the human rights petition against the United States, it was not personal against the U.S. administration, but it is personal when Inuit women have to think twice about nursing their babies. It's very personal that my grandson would lose what I had as the foundation upon which I can have the courage and the commitment and the focus to do what I do.
Within 2 generations.
Within 2 generations. So those are the connections. And those are important connections for people to understand that it is much more than the protection of the ice and polar bear. This is about human communities here in the Arctic that are trying to make it in this new world order of globalization.
Well, keep up the good fight, if that's the word, or the good passion, at least. I appreciate you doing this, Sheila. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.